Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about What If Deku Had a Different Fate Part 1. If you guys enjoy this What If and want to see Part 2, comment down below. And let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story 𝗵𝗃𝗁 from 𝗓𝗏. So let's start the video. Katsuki wakes to a ceiling that's all too nostalgic. The sun filters in the crack between the curtains with a gentle heat. His body isn't sore like it should be. He can't feel the swelling on his face or the countless bruises he gathered in the course of the battle. He stares at the ceiling and tries to figure out why the harsh fluorescents of a hospital are absent, why there's no smell of antiseptic, why he feels tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. He wakes to a morning in simpler times. A morning that feels more like a dream than a day. First of all, what the fuck? Second of all, what the fuck? When he was younger, he used to enjoy the warmth of the sun on his face as his eyes blinked open. When he was younger, he had a family to take care of him and fewer worries about the villains he'd have to face. When he was younger, he didn't carry guilt heavy upon his shoulders. When he was younger, he still knew how to dream. He's not so young anymore. Or rather, he shouldn't be. Katsuki stares upward and lifts his hand to his face. As he reaches to rub the sleep from his eyes, his fingers touch wetness. He wipes the tears away before they fall. The heat of battle drains from his system, but the cries of desperation still echo in his ears. Loudest of all is Deku, his voice raw with pain, breaking with agony. Katsuki clutches the front of his t-shirt. There is no injury, but it hurts like an open wound. Katsuki wakes to a morning that happened more than a decade ago. It is the morning 10 days before he hits the halfway mark to turning 4. It is the day he gets his quirk. It is the day he starts to look down on anyone who doesn't have one. The first explosion he sets of with small hands that are his once again comes out as a spark and a puff of smoke. He knows how much more powerful it will become. But for now, this is the extent of his abilities. Hardly enough to defend him from a mosquito, never mind an actual villain. He is nearly 3.5 years old, but with memories from when he was a US student. He looks down at his hands. They are small and soft. They bear no calluses from hard training, and no scars from battles fought or lost. At 3.5, his palms have never been dyed red with blood. At 3.5, he has hands that haven't hurt anyone. At 3.5, these small hands are blameless. Katsuki goes to preschool. There is no imposing ID checking wall surrounding the school, but the chain link fence is tall enough. At this height, he has to go through the gate properly, stubbornly refusing to hold the hand his mother holds out for him, but sticking close to the hem of her skirt nonetheless. He realizes that while he has memories, his mind is hardly that of someone older. The sunshine easily distracts him, but without any warning, someone mentions All Might, and he has to listen. Katsuki goes to preschool and walks straight into Deku. They collide lightly and bounce off each other. Deku stumbles slightly, but steadies himself with a smile on his face. At 3.5, they're still friends. At 3.5, he's never given Deku a reason to hate him. Katsuki looks at Deku and sees green eyes that haven't lost any of their glow. He sees a smile he long since realized he wanted to protect. Deku grins at him without hesitation, and Katsuki feels guilt stab his chest, because he may be 3.5, but he remembers all the reasons Deku should hate him. And Deku should hate him, though he never has. And Katsuki thinks that maybe, just maybe, he can give Deku the childhood he always deserved. Katsuki realizes that he's been given a second chance. Through someone's quirk or some random fold in the fabric of normal space-time, he ended up back before he labeled Deku quirkless. He looks at Deku and sees someone who can still be considered a friend. Deku doesn't bear scars that Katsuki gave him. Deku is still the Deku who dreams of being a hero and hasn't learned he doesn't have a quirk. He still looks at the world with innocent eyes, hasn't yet learned just how unfair the world can be. At lunchtime, Deku sits by him without question. Katsuki has to look around to remind himself that Deku doesn't have Uraraka and Ada to sit with. Katsuki shows off the small puff of an explosion, which is all he can currently muster, and tries not to let it show how annoyed he is at its lack of power. He'll be stronger someday. He clenches his jaw when Deku compliments him, and tries not to think about the number of times he tried to hit Deku with his explosions in his past life. Instead of boasting about his quirk for his own sake, he promises he'll protect people. He'll protect Izuku. Katsuki looks away from the sparkling smile he gets from Deku. He sees unadulterated admiration, and there's a knot in his stomach that tightens because of it. He has done nothing to hurt this person in front of him. Not yet. And he doesn't want to. But he has made Deku suffer too much. Left him in the dust and only doubled back to watch him cry. Katsuki can't count the number of scars he left, or the number of times Izuku saved him, including that. He can't think about it. The memories threaten to break the walls of his skull, and the back of his eyes throb. His hands are clean now, but he remembers when crimson dripped from his fingertips. He has caused too much pain. Maybe this second chance is a way for him to make up for it. Katsuki rubs his eyes angrily to keep the tears at bay. He doesn't need to cry. Plus, it looks fucking stupid if he does. Deku sees it though, and of course he has to comment because that's just who he is. Fuck. Kaken, are you okay? He asks, hand hovering somewhere close to Katsuki's shoulder, but not quite reaching. I'm fine. Shut up, shit nerd. Deku retracts his hand quickly and takes a step back. Oh, shit. What does he do now? Say sorry. Katsuki bites his lip. He can feel the tears he just wiped away threatening to return. And why the fuck does that keep happening? He has never been an easy crier. He blames it on being a little kid. That has to be the reason. He opens his mouth to respond. Kaken, that's a bad word, Izuku says in a hushed voice. Huh? Is that what he's worried about? His fucking vocabulary. I can say whatever the fuck I want to say. Izuku tries to correct him again, but Katsuki waves him off, and they go back to eating and Izuku goes back to talking about some random hero-related nonsense. Over the next few weeks, Katsuki becomes a little more aware of his quirk and a little more acclimated to his current situation. As time passes, it starts to feel normal living in the present, and not like he's living someone else's life. He still spaces out, or almost references events that haven't happened too many times to count. He blames the moments where he gets distracted by images of the battles they had in high school on nightmares, and ignores the overly concerned look on Izuku's face. He doesn't deserve Izuku's concern anyway. Over the next few weeks, Katsuki gets a little more used to being friends. It becomes natural to flick Izuku on the forehead when he says something stupid, or jab him in the ribs when he gets the too concerned look on his face after Katsuki spaces out. Izuku doesn't flinch away from him. He complains but doesn't flinch. This Katsuki has never really hurt him. Katsuki has never given him a lasting scar. And Katsuki's not sure if he'll ever get used to reaching towards Izuku and having him not instinctively pull away. Over the next few weeks, more of their classmates manifest their quirks. Izuku stays hopeful. Katsuki tries not to watch too closely. He tries not to listen whenever Izuku comments on his quirk. You're so strong, Kaken. I hope my quirk is cool like yours. Katsuki turns away and gets a little better at keeping the tears away. He still has the emotional control of a 3-year-old. And Izuku notices every time. The first time Katsuki goes over to Izuku's apartment, he feels like he's so out of place, it's not even funny. It's somewhere he vaguely remembers from another lifetime. It feels wrong to be welcomed into it. He blames seasonal allergies for the loud sniffle he gives as he steps over the threshold and kicks off his shoes. Izuku hands him the handkerchief that he carries around with him everywhere now. Katsuki snatches it away without a thank you. But he does express his gratitude to Izuku's mom for letting him come over. They settle in front of the TV in the living room and watch some documentary about the rise of heroes, and Katsuki finds himself a lot more interested than he would have expected. And while he is interested in the documentary, he finds his gaze wandering to Izuku's sparkling face. Katsuki wonders how he can look so damn happy every time he hears something about heroes. At some point, Inko brings them a plate of snacks. So they sit on the couch, sharing a bowl of popcorn like two friends, and Katsuki tries not to think about how nice it is, or how easy it would still be for him to fuck up. He tries to just sit back and watch the shitty documentary and keep himself from thinking too hard, because if he thinks too hard, he'll have to borrow Deku's handkerchief again. And he doesn't want that. The second time Katsuki goes over to Izuku's apartment, he feels only marginally less out of place. This time, they spend their time battling each other in the world of a video game. Katsuki doesn't mind going all out in the virtual world, or rather, his pride wouldn't let him do anything else, even if it would probably make Deku smile if he let him win. Katsuki knows there are other ways to make him smile that don't involve losing. So he kicks Deku's ass in the video game and thoroughly gloats about it, even after they put the controllers away. Katsuki spends his days going to preschool and trying not to be a total dick to Izuku. His success varies day to day. Deku still pisses him off by accident, just by talking too much about heroes. But he's still left with the faint admiration from their high school years when he looked at Deku and saw someone with a wealth of knowledge to back up his shitty control of his quirk. So, Katsuki tries not to yell or curse, or talk about how cool his quirk is when Izuku doesn't have one. Since those are the three things Katsuki usually did around Deku, he sometimes finds himself quiet. Katsuki spends his nights trying to figure out what the fuck actually happened to him. But grasping onto memories of his last lifetime is like grasping onto memories of a dream. They're slipping away from him. He's left with a clearly defined sense of guilt where Deku is concerned and nightmares that slip into blackness as he wakes in the morning. When he sees Deku during the day, he tries to forget the nightmares and the images of his face bloodied and bruised. He tries to forget the way his voice sounds when he was older and screaming in pain. Katsuki has varying success with that too. He figures Deku gets used to the way he spaces out or flinches away from empty air. He figures it's fine that way. Deku doesn't have to know. Deku shouldn't have to suffer that pain again. Things even out as Katsuki gets more used to being friends. Yes, he can actually think of them as friends. It becomes second nature to walk home to Izuku's apartment instead of his own. Things are easy while classmates are still exploring new quirks or just getting them. But Katsuki watches each day pass wondering when someone will label Izuku quirkless. Katsuki turns 4. His explosions are hardly puffs of smoke, a cheap magic trick in comparison to what he will be capable of someday. Izuku still looks at him with nothing but admiration. Whispers in the classroom about Izuku's lack of quirk start 3 months after his 4th birthday. The teacher has talked about being quirkless, mentioned those rare cases that still exist. Katsuki's gaze finds its way to Izuku every time. He still hasn't given up hope. Not yet. The whispers in the classroom grow louder. A few people snicker when they see Izuku walk by. Katsuki glares each one down. Maybe that's why no one drags Izuku out behind the school building just to laugh at him for being less than them. Maybe that's why Izuku doesn't have to suffer bullies. Because this time Katsuki isn't the bully. He stands at Izuku's side with a threat in his eyes that no one dares to test. Even a puff of smoke is enough to make most preschoolers cry. There comes a day when Izuku stops talking about when his quirk will manifest. His face is downcast, and the glow in his green eyes is a little less. Everything from the frown on his lips to the slope of his shoulders speaks of a sullen mood. I'm quirkless, Kaken. Katsuki's mouth opens. But what can he say? He knows that Izuku will someday match him in strength. For now, almost makes it past his lips. But he can't tell Izuku. He can't talk to Izuku about a past he will never know. Izuku endured a quirkless childhood once, without ever giving up hope. After all, even if he's quirkless, he can still be a hero. He registers Izuku's look of open-eyed surprise before he realizes what he said. When the words make it to his own ears, he swallows uncomfortably, but doesn't take back the statement. There's plenty you can do just being a nerd with a bunch of notes about heroes swimming in your head. There's plenty you can do without a flashy quirk. He has seen Izuku struggle, and he has seen him fight. A quirkless middle schooler dashing forward when even pro heroes wouldn't make a move. Katsuki takes a breath. He's never been good at encouragement. Support has always been someone else's job, and for good reason, but he can manage this much. You'll never be a hero if you give up. He meets Izuku's look of surprise. Katsuki is hardly one to give comforting words. He feels his face redden slightly. Fuck. Izuku looks at him for a moment, before his face relaxes into a smile that's already lost some of its brightness. Being quirkless is hard. And it's only been 2 years since he was labeled thus. He has another 8 years to go. The next time Izuku asks him to come over because he hasn't been able to get even a simple invitation to play video games or watch another damn hero documentary out in the 2 years, he's been trying to be Izuku's friend, he says, let's have a sleepover. Izuku's eyes light up with ideas of pillow forts and staying up past his usual bedtime. Katsuki says yes, before he thinks about it, before he remembers he wakes up in cold sweat almost every night. He is in a nearly 6-year-old body, and he carries memories of someone more than twice his current age. He says yes, and he can't take it back. Not when Izuku looks at him with such a pure happiness on his face. So Katsuki grits his teeth and decides that he'll try to stay up the whole night, so he doesn't have nightmares he has to recover from. When he comes over to Izuku's apartment, it's like the other times. They play outside, but Izuku scrapes his knee, and Katsuki laughs at him until he sees tears form in Izuku's eyes and shit, don't cry. He drags Izuku back inside and makes sure he puts a band-aid on it, even though it's barely bleeding. Then they play video games until Katsuki finally tires of kicking Izuku's ass in a racing game and beating his character to a pulp in another. Then Izuku's mother is there urging them to get some sleep. They stand next to each other at the bathroom sink to brush their teeth. Katsuki accidentally elbows Izuku twice. The first time, all Izuku does is shift away slightly, but the second he steps away more dramatically. "Kaken, that tickles," he complains, voice muffled because of the toothbrush in his mouth. There's a dribble of toothpaste at the corner of his mouth that irks Katsuki slightly, but he's more focused on something else. He spits into the sink and wipes his mouth on the nearest towel. "You're ticklish." Izuku steps back. "No." Katsuki eyes him for a moment before lunging. "You're ticklish, aren't you, you fucking nerd? Deku, don't lie to me." Izuku doesn't react fast enough, and they end up on the tile floor. Izuku is most definitely ticklish, Katsuki learns. Very. Inko pokes her head in to see what on earth all the squealing is about when all they were supposed to be doing is brushing their teeth. She opens the bathroom door to find Izuku curled up with tears of laughter in his eyes and Katsuki with a victorious smirk on his face. Her eyebrows raise in worry until Izuku sits up, still holding back giggles. "Don't do that," Izuku wheezes. "No promises," Katsuki answers. Inko sends them to bed after that. Katsuki is slightly astounded, but not really surprised to find that Izuku owns no less than 3 sets of All Might pajamas. Izuku's room is also decked in various hero posters, most of which are also All Might. They settle into Izuku's bed, which is easily big enough for 2 6-year-olds. Izuku falls asleep quickly, but Katsuki keeps his eyes open and stares at the ceiling. If he stays awake, he won't have nightmares. At 6 years old, it's difficult to stay awake for an entire night. At 6 years old, he finds his eyes heavy with fatigue before the clock on Izuku's bedside table reads midnight. At 6 years old, it's impossible to keep the nightmares away. They come like they always do, shadows seeping into happier dreams. He dreams of simple things first. He dreams of beating up villains or standing on top of the world with a crowd cheering for him. Other times he dreams of a future in the other world, a future where he sits beside the Izuku he'd been so cruel to for so long. A future where they sit shoulder to shoulder. A future where he had a chance to ask for forgiveness. A future where it was given. The nightmares roll in like black fog, obscuring whatever he was seeing before and engulfing his consciousness. They aren't always clear, aren't always full memories. But there are always screams. It is always dark. He can see vague outlines and shadowy shapes. He can feel the blood dripping down his skin. In a mass of screaming voices, Izuku's is the clearest, its tone piercing through the darkness like a knife. Katsuki never makes it in time. His steps are a moment late, a little too slow, and his hand falls short, fingertips grasping for something out of reach. Someone calls his name in a small voice. The nightmare releases him slowly, tendrils of darkness and fear still clinging to his thoughts. Katsuki rises through layers of consciousness, until he feels hands gripping his shoulders and shaking him. He hears Izuku's voice, younger, not screaming in agony. "Kaken, Kaken." Izuku's voice is desperate, a little too reminiscent of those nightmares. "I'm awake, damn it," Katsuki answers. His throat is dry, and Izuku, no doubt, hears the unsteadiness in his tone. "Kaken, are you okay?" Izuku fixes him with a concerned look in the soft glow the night light provides. He wonders how many times Izuku has asked that question, and how many times he brushed it off as a nuisance. Katsuki pushes himself into a sitting position with shaking hands. His body feels weak, and his heart feels like it's beating out of time. Cold fear lingers in the back of his mind. He has to remind himself that Izuku is there with him. Right there, close enough to touch. "Yeah, I'm fine." There is a tremor in his voice as he speaks, and he knows Izuku won't believe him for a second. All he hopes is that Izuku won't ask about the nightmares. Mercifully, Izuku stays silent. He does, however, hold out one hand, his fingers spread open. "Whenever I have a nightmare, Mom does this," he says. Katsuki sees the determined look in his eyes and stares at his hand. It's not scarred. Not even calloused. Katsuki remains frozen still. "Take it." Izuku wiggles his fingers. Izuku looks at him expectantly. His eyes are bright green, even in the low light of the room. Katsuki glares back petulantly. Holding hands is stupid, and his quirk, but Izuku looks at him without fear. It's concern he sees reflected in Izuku's eyes. And trust. Katsuki relents. Lets Izuku take his hand and intertwine their fingers. They lie back down facing each other. Izuku gives him a ridiculously happy smile. "It's okay," Izuku tells him. "There's nothing to worry about." "Shut up, shit nerd. Just go to sleep." Katsuki sleeps the rest of the night without nightmares. His dreams are peaceful for once. They wake with the sun in their faces from the window, with a curtain that they forgot to close. Their eyes open at the same time, eyelids fluttering in an attempt to clear the sleep away. Katsuki lets go of Izuku's hand like it burned him. But even after he pulls away, his palm remembers the shape of Izuku's hand. Izuku asks him if he slept well, and asks about the nightmares too. Katsuki gives non-committal answers to both questions. It's the conclusion to the first of many times Izuku asks him to sleep over. They stay up later as they get older, playing video games or talking about heroes or whatnot. Katsuki tries to stay awake to avoid the nightmares. Izuku grabs one of his hands every time. Then they wake in the morning at the same time. It's a good routine, comfortable. Katsuki tries not to take it for granted that Izuku will always reach for him. Izuku never asks him what the nightmares are about after the first time. As he grows older, the nightmares stay the same. As he grows older, he starts reaching for Izuku's hand first. At 8 years old, Katsuki realizes how confident Izuku is. Izuku is confident. When he walks through the halls of the school, he walks with his eyes forward instead of glancing around for danger. People still laugh at him for being quirkless, of course. But those people don't include Katsuki. Izuku spends the first part of his life without being hounded by bullies. He isn't a mess of low to non-existent self-esteem who can only meet other people's eyes half of the time. He still has an obsession with heroes, still spends half his day scribbling random things in those hero notebooks, still cries over little things, but he smiles more. He smiles stronger. On a day when he goes home from school separately from Izuku, he gets punched for the first time. Izuku is probably off browsing the aisles of a hero merchandise store. Half of the time, Izuku drags Katsuki along with him, but there's only so much hero obsessing that Katsuki can put up with. As Katsuki heads home, he does something to tick off someone in the class, a couple years above theirs. It's not even clear what he did. Maybe he ran into one of them, or just made a face that pissed them off. It's not the first time some older kid gets mad at him. With his attitude towards others, it would be more of a surprise if he hadn't pissed off someone. Usually he gets away with a few threats or nasty looks, and nothing more. The tallest of the group tells him to apologize. Katsuki glares up at him. Like hell is he going to apologize, especially not for something he didn't do. He tells them he doesn't give a fuck about them, and that makes them angrier. In retrospect, keeping his mouth shut would have been smart, but he'd rather have bruises than broken pride. Katsuki feels a heavy hand settle on his shoulder as he turns to walk away. He has a badass quirk, but he's smaller than them. He's just 8 years old, and there are 3 of them. Assholes. Katsuki fights back with the small fists he has now. He tries not to cry, but he'd forgotten how much simple punches can hurt. He has never been in a serious fight in this lifetime. He has never beaten anyone up in this lifetime. His mind vaguely remembers how it works. His body doesn't. Katsuki walks away with his face already darkening with bruises and his eyes stinging with tears that he swore not to shed. At least Izuku wasn't there to see it. At least Izuku wasn't in danger. He thinks it's ironic that he's the one getting bullied this time. Katsuki wipes his eyes angrily. He needs to be stronger. At this point, he's not strong enough to protect himself. How the hell can he expect himself to protect someone else? He half sprints the rest of the way home and wrenches the door open. He tries to duck inside their apartment without notice, because he doesn't want to face his parents. He doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't want to hear about how weak he is. He already knows that. There's too much he's lost because he wasn't strong enough. If he had been stronger, they would have made it through the last time. If he had been stronger, he could have protected Izuku properly. If he had been stronger, he would have at least been able to tear those villains apart himself before they even had a chance to reach Izuku. He's not lucky enough to slip through the door without notice. His mother blocks his path before he can get to his room. "Leave me the fuck alone," he says through gritted teeth. Dealing with his mother is one thing. It's bad enough to listen to her nagging. Dealing with hearing the phone ring and having his mother yell down the hallway that Izuku is on the phone because they were supposed to meet at the park half an hour ago is another thing completely. Katsuki feels his already bad day getting worse. He knows he will be fine physically at least, but he can't tell Izuku about this. Deku would worry and fuss over him or whatever, and that would be a pain in the ass. "Tell him I forgot, damn it," Katsuki yells back through the apartment walls. His mother relays his answer word for word, including his explicative. Katsuki grits his teeth in annoyance. "Tell him I'll see him tomorrow." He's in no way in a mood where he wants to be around Izuku. Not because he doesn't want to see Izuku, but because he hates the idea that Izuku might think of him as weak. He'd have reason to. After all, he just got his ass kicked. His mother kicks in his bedroom door a minute later and hands him an ice pack for his face. "You made the other guy look worse, right?" she says. Katsuki doesn't bother correcting her. By the next morning, The bruise on his cheek has darkened, and his jaw hurts a little when he tries to eat breakfast. He braces himself before he walks down the stairs and meets Izuku at the gate. He turns away when he sees Izuku's green eyes widen with concern. There's a white patch over the worst bruise, but there's a lighter one on his forehead that's still visible, and a couple on his arms that stay hidden under the long sleeves of his school uniform. He knocks away the hand Izuku extends toward him. Let's just walk to school. Izuku doesn't press the issue, but Katsuki can feel the cloud of worry float along next to them as they walk. It weighs on him, heavier and heavier, as they walk, until he can't stand it anymore. I'm fine, you idiot, so stop that. Izuku jerks out of his overly concerned state of focus. Huh? I'm fine, you fucking idiot, so don't worry about me. Katsuki flicks Izuku squarely in the center of his forehead. Izuku looks at him in surprise for a moment, before his expression changes. 𝗵𝗃𝗻𝗲, you're right. You're really strong, Kaken. He gives Katsuki a smile, the smile Katsuki promised himself he'd protect this time. It falters for a moment. You'll be fine. Heroes always win, right? Izuku asks without quite looking at him, and with a smile that looks a little too much like it's just painted on his face. Katsuki doesn't manage to form his worry into a question in time to ask, and Izuku starts rambling about the newest issue of Heroes Monthly in some semblance of normalcy. Over the next few days, the bruises start to fade. Katsuki has to suffer a few funny looks from classmates, but Izuku doesn't try to talk about what happened again. He watches Izuku's expression more closely, wondering if he just imagined his smile faltering. He hates the idea that he's already fucked up, that he has already let something bad happen. He considers asking, but what could he say? Hey, fuckmunch, you don't look as happy as usual. So instead of asking, he sticks a little closer than ordinarily does and agrees every time Izuku asks him to go look at hero things or whatever. Of course, it's Izuku who brings up the slight changes in their dynamic. Izuku, who is braver than him in ways he doesn't want to admit. It's Izuku who sets down the controller for the video game first and faces him. Kaken, did something change? There's genuine worry in his voice, almost like he thinks he did something wrong. Katsuki goes through 100 kinds of anxious in the next second, and somehow manages to restrain his knee-jerk reaction to swear that everything is perfect. What the fuck? Instead, he tries to formulate a real response. But he doesn't know how he's supposed to ask, or even what. In the end, he says, your smile. Izuku stares at him. Katsuki fumbles. What kind of idiot? It looks different. Izuku's eyes widen with surprise, which just reminds him that even in this lifetime, Izuku doesn't seem used to the idea that he genuinely cares. And fuck, did Izuku ever know he actually gave a shit? No, of course not. He'd sworn things would be different, and they are. But as every second passes, he grows more and more sure that he has done something wrong. Izuku picks at the hem of his sleeve. The weather is cool, since fall is setting in, and he's wearing long sleeves, but the gesture somehow stands out. An idea hits Katsuki with the same impact as a brick to the head. Just because he wasn't there to see it doesn't mean it couldn't happen. Just because he wasn't the one responsible doesn't mean someone else couldn't be. He feels his gut twist. Fuck, he should have known. He grabs Izuku's arm and yanks the sleeve up. Purple splotches stand out on pale, freckled skin. Shitty Deku, why the hell didn't you tell me? He doesn't realize that his fingernails are digging into Izuku's skin until he feels Izuku try to pull away, until he sees the tears start to pool. When he does, Katsuki lets go like he would hot coals. He looks guiltily at the imprints of his nails. They darken quickly, angry red. Who did this? Fucking I'll kill them. All of them. Shitheads. Katsuki's hands curl into fists that tremble by his sides. He's not sure how far he'd take his usual threat. All he knows is that he wants to make them pay. And why didn't Izuku tell him? His nails dig into his own palms. I'll kill them now, Katsuki says, getting up from his position on the couch, and not thinking at all about how he'll find them. Izuku stops him by grabbing his wrist, with hands that are a little clammy, but manage to hold a firm grip. As Izuku clings to him, he can't tell who's shaking more. Kaken, you're scaring me, he says in a small voice. The shaking stops. His breath hitches. If there was anything that would break Katsuki rage, it was that. His heart freezes. His arms go slack. Izuku slowly lets go, and his arm drops to his side. Katsuki sits back down heavily, farther away from Izuku than he was before, but only because he doesn't think he deserves to be close. You should have told me, Katsuki says, still seething, still furious, but no longer yelling. I knew you'd get mad, Izuku murmurs. Katsuki bites his lip. Of course he'd get mad. What kind of shitty reason is that? His voice doesn't carry its usual bite. The response isn't immediate. Instead, Izuku twists his hands in his lap. I thought you'd think it was weak. I didn't even try to fight. His hands stop twisting. Sorry. Katsuki sits with his thumbs pressed into his forehead. He would try to calm himself, but he doesn't know where to start. Fury bubbles to the surface, but guilt isn't far behind. His mind spins with echoes of another life, and all the scenarios he can imagine for this one. Izuku's words don't make it from his ears to his brain. His own thoughts are too loud. The 2 points of pressure on his forehead are a constant, a way to ground himself. In this lifetime, he'd thought Izuku would grow up happier. He feels the world around him breaking apart, pieces falling out of place. He thought he had been careful. He thought he was strong enough to take some of the blows meant for Izuku. But he thought that before, hadn't he? He wonders if he has the power to change anything for the better. So far, all he's done is mess things up. Kaken, are you all right? Izuku's voice is timid, like he's handling something dangerous. Katsuki's head snaps up in response. He's faced with green eyes that are full of concern. Izuku has always worried about others more than he worries about himself. He looks at Katsuki, and Katsuki can't find the strength to look away. Something painful settles in his chest. It isn't as fiery as anger or as heavy as guilt, but he wants to get rid of it as soon as possible. Katsuki glances down to see that Izuku has already rolled down his sleeves to hide the bruises. His eyes return to Izuku's face. I'll be fine after I kick their asses. What about you? Izuku quells the conversation with a smile that's definitely not as bright as it should be. Thank you for worrying about me, Kaken, Izuku says softly. Katsuki feels his eyes sting with tears he tried to train them not to shed. Izuku still carries the handkerchief, and hasn't asked not yet, anyway. As he dabs his eyes as surreptitiously as he can, Katsuki bumps their shoulders to convey something like compassion, even if he can't bring himself to say it aloud. The rest of the afternoon passes in silence. Katsuki picks up the controller again, and half-heartedly beats Deku, no less than 4 times. The mood between them feels heavy, like it has been stained darker. Katsuki's anger simmers, just below the level where it bursts out and hurts someone. But he holds it down, shoves it deep inside, where it won't bother him just yet. Even if he's failed at keeping Izuku safe, he hasn't been the one to hurt him. Katsuki sleeps over. That's what they'd planned, but there was no way leaving would feel like the right thing to do anyway. They go through the normal routine of finding pajamas and brushing their teeth elbow to elbow at the bathroom sink, but they do it with a lot more silence than usual. That night, Katsuki finds himself unable to sleep. His eyes are full of the bruises left on Izuku's arms. Even with their hands connected like they always are, Izuku feels out of reach. Katsuki clenches his free hand. He needs to be stronger. He'll sit on top of the world just so he can protect Izuku from it. The nightmares come that night. They come in with more force than usual, maybe because of what happened that day. Katsuki feels his body, ragged from fighting, and nearly beaten. He sees the room around them. It's dimly lit. He hears echoes of the voices of friend and foe alike, but there's only one he hears clearly. Kaken. Broken, not enough air in his lungs. Kaken. Katsu. He wakes in cold sweat. There's someone shaking his shoulders. They're saying something, but he can't hear, because his ears are still ringing with blood-curdling screams. The moment he realizes who it is through his half-delirium, he lunges forward, clinging onto him to make sure it's real. His name, his real name, not Deku. Not useless, spills from Katsuki's lips over and over. It echoes in his head, and he hears his voice older. Izuku's heartbeat is strong in his chest. It's steady, like it should be. It's there, like it should be. Katsuki listens to it, and calms his breathing to its rhythm. He starts to peel himself off, glad that Izuku doesn't question him. But this time, Kaken, can we stay like this a little longer? Katsuki opens his mouth to refuse, but he shuts it before any sound comes out. He stops trying to separate and relinquishes his doubts for the moment. He lets himself stay pressed against his childhood friend. His own heartbeat is loud in his chest, its rhythm slowly sinking to Izuku's. Somewhere in the early hours just before dawn, as the room is starting to turn a sort of grayish, they fall asleep again. Morning is different. They wake up close, the space between them almost zero. Katsuki realizes first and springs away, without realizing quite how close to the edge of the bed he is. Izuku wakes at the loud thud. Kaken. Shut the hell up. Izuku's face relaxes as Katsuki rights himself, adjusting his limbs until he sits cross-legged on the floor. Then he laughs. He tries to stifle it at first, but it bursts out. Katsuki grinds his teeth in annoyance. Shut up, you piece of shit. Sorry. Izuku apologizes through his laughter. It's just everything feels normal, even after yesterday. Don't talk about that, Katsuki snaps. He frowns at the look on Izuku's face. It looks like he's dwelling on too many different things. He's pensive in a way that doesn't suit someone his age. Katsuki picks himself up off the floor. He still needs to figure out how he will become stronger and stronger and stronger. But he can't stand looking at that expression for a moment longer. Katsuki does the first thing that comes to mind. He tickles Izuku, drawing out shrieks of laughter. When he stops, Izuku takes a few seconds to recover. What was that for? Katsuki answers with a shrug. Let's go get breakfast. Things settle over the next few days. Katsuki sticks by Izuku's side a little more than usual, but he sees no sign of bullies. He watches over his best friend with uneasy attentiveness. In class, his attention wanders from the lesson, as he thinks he sees hints of something out of the corner of his eye. He acts like he's on a battlefield again, like there's a possibility of getting attacked at every turn, and adrenaline pumps through his veins in a way that makes it difficult to sit still. Katsuki walks Izuku home after school. Their apartments are only a short distance away, but it gives him some peace of mind, and Izuku seems to enjoy the increase in time together. When Katsuki returns to his own home, he asks his mother to teach him how to fight. She wanted to be a pro hero once, after all. He's wary about it at first, given that she's quite likely to flatten him without a second thought. But at the moment, there's no one better he can think of, so he petitions her, carefully, and hopes he doesn't die. After the first training session, he has almost as many bruises from her as he does from the bullies. But he's starting to get used to the pain and how to dodge. He doesn't tell Izuku about it either. Maybe there's a fear that Izuku will look at him differently. Maybe it's something else. But whatever the reason, he can walk beside Izuku with more confidence. Just the thought that he is training his body makes him feel, not stronger, not yet, but more like he has a fighting chance. Katsuki thinks it lucky that he has classes with Izuku every day. It's also lucky that the rest of the class is pretty much resigned that they go everywhere together, and is collectively at least a little terrified of Katsuki. The only problem is that he knows the bullies are around somewhere, but isn't sure where. He spends his days on high alert, acting as Izuku's bodyguard. After a month or so of training with his mother, he decides he's strong enough to deal with the 3 assholes who beat him up earlier. He suspects that they have something to do with Izuku's bruises, too. He was caught off guard, he reasons, and those kinds of idiots can't be too strong. His next problem is to figure out how to track them down, and starts by organizing what he knows. There are other students at their school, and they're probably a couple years older, given their heights. Katsuki takes to peering into other classrooms when he walks past, but that doesn't help much. Luckily, the bullies make it easy for him. After school, Katsuki and Izuku walk to the arcade, and he spies them hogging all the best games like the assholes they are. The 2 taller ones sit next to each other, and their screens depict similar images of brightly colored cars racing down an obstacle course. The third sits in the chair of the next game over, but his eyes are glued on the race. Katsuki sees their backpacks and school uniform jackets strewn haphazardly down the entire row of games. Katsuki spends a good 30 seconds glaring at the back of their heads, considering whether to turn around and drag Izuku home before he can get hurt or not. But the anger that has been simmering in his vein for 6 weeks is about to boil over. He can't bring himself to leave. I'm going to beat those fuckers up, he tells Izuku. Izuku looks alarmed. Something that's almost certainly a plea to stop shines in his eyes. Don't stop me. I won't listen, Katsuki says. Izuku's mouth snaps shut. Then I'm coming with you. Katsuki takes one look at Izuku's face and decides it's best to let him come along. He's seen Izuku's stubbornness in action, and he doesn't want to argue now. He turns to the bullies and takes deliberately loud steps as he approaches. The one that's just observing the race looks up, amusement spreading across his face as he realizes who it is. Katsuki smirks. The bullies aren't hard to bait, and 10 minutes later, they stand facing each other in a park a couple blocks from the arcade. It's long enough after the end of the school day that the park is empty except for someone walking a dog on the far side and a group of high schoolers hanging from one of the trees. None of them are paying attention to the imminent fight. Die, you pieces of shit, Katsuki yells, and the first sparks erupt from his fingertips. His estimation of their strength turns out to be a little off, and taking on 3 of them at once might have been too ambitious. One of them gets Izuku in a headlock, and Katsuki can feel his blood pressure rise. If Izuku gets injured, this is his fault. Fear is one of the things he hasn't forgotten from the other universe. It rises ugly and powerful in his stomach. It spills down his throat like acid. His body goes into overdrive. This is the battle mode he drops into when the situation feels desperate. His throat is ragged from heavy breathing and screaming, but his mind is focused. He goes for the bully that seems to have some power over the other two, with explosions tearing from his hands. Behind him, one of the others shouts, and he sees Izuku drop to the ground. With that, the fight is finished. Izuku spits blood out of his mouth, and for one panicked second, he thinks it's his own. In the next, Katsuki notices that the arm responsible for Izuku's headlock has a bloody crescent of teeth marks. He grins at that. The pain from the blows he's taken hasn't registered yet, and his system is still full of adrenaline. Hey Deku, let's go home. Maybe it's the blood still rushing through his veins. Or it's just the happiness Katsuki has now that he's beaten those assholes to a pulp. But in any case, he's feeling a lot more positive about life in general. Or maybe he's just lightheaded from taking a punch or two to the face. He examines Izuku. A line of someone else's blood dribbles down his chin, and a bruise swells on his forehead. Izuku catches him staring. Is there how bad? He asks nervously, putting his hands up to his cheeks. You look as dumb as usual. Katsuki answers, quickly looking away from Izuku's startlingly green eyes. Does it hurt? Huh? Izuku stops walking. Katsuki stops a few feet farther on. Does it hurt? He repeats. Your face, he clarifies. Izuku gapes at him. Is it that weird for me to be worried? Katsuki snaps, feeling the heat rising in his face. And not really. Good, 'cause I do worry. You're a dumb, stubborn piece of shit who never runs away when he should. What kind of friend would I be if I didn't worry? And, he cuts off abruptly. Are you crying? Indeed, he is. Katsuki awkwardly falls silent, unsure of what he said to elicit that kind of reaction. Izuku sniffles loudly, his eyes streaming with tears. Did I say something wrong? Katsuki asks. Izuku takes a minute to calm himself, and when he does answer, his words are muffled by his hands. Katsuki hears them clearly all the same. I'm just really glad we're friends. After that, they continue to the apartment complex where they live. Without thinking about it, Katsuki's feet lead him to the front of Izuku's apartment. Midoriya Inko opens the door, and cries almost as much as Izuku when she sees their bruised faces. She fusses over them for nearly an entire hour before she's convinced that they are, in fact, not dying and will be all right. Katsuki gratefully closes the door to Izuku's room. When he wakes in the morning, Katsuki stares at the ceiling of a room that's not his own, but is almost as familiar. It's warm with the sun filtering through the window, and his fingers tangled with Izuku's. This comfort and peace is something Katsuki realizes he wants to hold on to, and something he thinks he doesn't quite deserve. As autumn turns to winter, Katsuki continues to train with his mother. She works him hard, but always makes sure to remind him not to strain his growing body, and to let himself rest. He vaguely remembers how he trained at UA and how he can strengthen his quirk, so he tries that, too. As they graduate from elementary school and enter middle school, he gains several centimeters on Izuku in height, and a lot more weight in muscle. Izuku is quiet beside him and still shy, but more easily outspoken about his thoughts. He shares the notes he keeps on heroes, and Katsuki tries not to think of notebook number 13. In middle school, a few kids try to tease Izuku for being quirkless, but Katsuki silences them quickly. Their years seem to be passing by too quickly. Katsuki knows their high school years will be fraught with danger, but the more he tries to cling on to peaceful moments, the faster they seem to slip away. As he gets older, the nightmares start to worsen. He still dreams of the same day. The same screams. The same agony. Most nights he wakes up alone in his dark room, cursing himself for being so dependent on Izuku to calm him. As he gets older, there starts to be an uncomfortable flutter in his chest when Izuku reaches for his hand or smiles at him softly. He's 14, and their male classmates start pulling the girls' pigtails and whispering about the wonders of swimsuit magazines and other things. Izuku tends to go red when these topics appear in conversation, and there's something about his expression at those times that Katsuki doesn't like. It's only when he overhears a very loud and giggly conversation between a group of girls in their class that Katsuki puts together the butterflies in his stomach, and the reason he gets uncomfortable when the other boys talk about girls. He overhears them talking about a flutter in their chests when so-and-so looks their way, or don't his eyes look just beautiful. Katsuki walks away very quickly, but not fast enough to avoid the realization that he has a horrible, irrevocable crush on his best friend. The conversation about crushes is still ringing in his head when Izuku rejoins him. It's then that Katsuki realizes there is hardly a moment during the school day when they're not together, and that makes his situation, well, a little dire. Since his revelation, Katsuki feels like his heartbeats are magnified tenfold, when Izuku is anywhere in his vicinity. By the end of the day, he feels like his brain is about to explode, and he has to do something to alleviate the pressure before any actual combustion occurs. They usually walk home together after school, but Katsuki tells Izuku to go first, giving some crappy excuse about leaving a textbook in the classroom. Izuku knows he didn't, and he gives Katsuki a look like he's about to tell him so. But ultimately, he decides to walk away. It hurts to watch him leave, but Katsuki thinks it's for the best. He needs time to clear his head, or come up with something before he makes a complete fool of himself. It's just one day. Izuku will be fine by himself for one day. But one day turns into 3, and then 3 turns into a week. Katsuki tells himself he's not avoiding Izuku, he's giving his friend space, that's all, and it's just for a little while. Just until he figures out how to make eye contact without his face flushing. They still walk to school together, but Katsuki is quieter, and he finds excuses to spend more time with the other people in their class. Every time Izuku turns a brilliant shade of desk, when a girl greets him, Katsuki has to struggle not to blow up his desk, and it's getting harder. He sits through a nearly silent lunch with Izuku. It's easier to deal with his stupid, crushing feelings in the absence of conversation. He can almost pretend Izuku isn't there and just focus on his food. But of course, the peace is only temporary. Kaken, did you hear about the new superhero movie? It's about a kid vigilante who has a speed quirk and a sword. Would you go see it? With me, I mean. Izuku looks down. You seem kind of busy lately, so it's fine if you don't. The way Izuku's voice trails off makes Katsuki's chest hurt. Of course, dumbass, I'll go with you, he says, and it takes everything he has to keep his voice in a semi-neutral tone. If he didn't know better, he'd say Izuku just asked him out on a date. But that would be ridiculous. Never mind the fact that they'd gone and seen movies together before. This is nothing different and should just be considered normal. Even after telling himself that, Katsuki finds his chest swelling with warmth and his heart pounding faster than ever. They decide to go on Sunday when they don't have school. Or rather, Izuku suggests a time, and Katsuki is too busy trying to keep a lid on his combustion that he doesn't have anything to say. For the rest of the afternoon, Katsuki has to struggle to focus on his studies. If he gets bad grades, his mom will kick his ass. But it's still hard to find the willpower to look at the blackboard and actually understand what the teachers are writing. One way or another, Katsuki makes it to the end of the week. He also managed to get a decent grade on the quiz in English, even though his concentration was severely compromised. By Saturday night, he both wants it to be Sunday already and doesn't. He is happy to have time to spend with Izuku because he has a crush, gotta admit. But he doesn't want his friend to know, ever. His goal is keeping Izuku alive and healthy through high school, or until whenever they get rid of all for one for good. His goal has nothing to do with romance. When Sunday morning dawns, Katsuki has hardly slept. Stress is a pain in the ass, he concludes, and so is having a crush. He meets Izuku at the bottom of the stairs in their apartment complex. They walk in silence, Katsuki constantly reminding himself that this is not a date. He and Izuku are just good friends, as they have been now for several years. It's normal and not romantic. If his imagination gets too far down the romance path, he will actually blow something up. He concentrates so hard on how it's not a date that he misses walking up to the ticket counter and only notices when Izuku pokes him in the side with a ticket. It goes in his pocket for safekeeping. The lobby is crowded with people. There are a lot of families with small children and a few couples here and there. Izuku looks at the crowd apprehensively. Let's get popcorn, Katsuki says. He can't remember if it's normal for him to grab Izuku's wrist and drag him off or not. But being connected isn't a bad thing when there's a large crowd. Katsuki walks forward without looking back. If he did, he'd probably die of embarrassment or something. His face is already burning, because Izuku's skin is warm against his. They arrive at the end of the popcorn line slightly out of breath, and Katsuki drops Izuku's thin wrist. He doesn't have a good excuse to keep hanging on, and he really shouldn't anyway. The line is slow, but they eventually make it out with a large bucket of popcorn, and only a couple minutes before the movie starts. The movie is okay, Katsuki decides. It's a lot of typical action movie stuff, but Izuku seems to like it, so he keeps quiet and munches on the popcorn. Leaving the theater, Izuku gushes about one action sequence or another. Katsuki tunes out most of what Izuku says as they head for home. Izuku interrupts his train of thought when he says, "Kaken, I'm going to learn how to use a sword." Katsuki takes a minute to process what Izuku said. A sword? As in, a sword? What the fuck? Or a staff? Or nunchucks? Or something? I mean, I don't have a quirk, but I still want to be a hero, which means I should have an actual method of fighting. I'm not that strong physically, but if I learned how to use a weapon, you want to fight villains who have powerful quirks with a sword. Yes. You're going to go up against shitty villains with powerful, evil quirks with a piece of metal. Are you fucking? Yeah, that's the idea. Deku, no. Katsuki tries to gather his thoughts. You can't. Katsuki finishes the sentence in his head. He doesn't want to step on Izuku's dreams, but it would be complete idiocy to let him try to fight with only a sword. Izuku takes a deep breath and fixes Katsuki with the kind of determined glare he has whenever someone tells him to give up. Katsuki swallows uncomfortably. He can feel the color of his face darkening by the second. He doesn't want to discourage Izuku, but he's morally obligated not to encourage this, too. With a jolt, he realizes that's exactly what he had been trying to tell Izuku, even if that wasn't what he meant to convey. What if you get a quirk someday? Katsuki asks, before he can stop himself. As expected, Izuku stares, determination replaced by a mixture of shock and confusion, and something else, something that looks vaguely like betrayal. But that can't be right. It was a stupid thing to say. People don't get quirks at 14. Kaken, Izuku says, and there's a kind of pain in his voice that Katsuki really hates. If I want to be a hero, I have to do it with my own strength, the strength I was born with. There's not a good response for that, so Katsuki doesn't reply. But he silently promises that Izuku will never walk into a fight alone. If Katsuki is there, he'll be able to do something no matter what happens. He has to. Katsuki ignores the small voice in his head that tells him, that's not what happened last time. After the movie, Katsuki sits in his room with the lights off and the door closed. He's supposed to be sleeping, but like many other nights where he can't get his mind off of things, he lies staring up at the ceiling without really seeing it. And, just like other nights, he thinks about Izuku. He still can't stand to be in close proximity to his friend without feeling like he's going to have a heart attack. And really, when he's supposed to be protecting Izuku, it would help if he were functional. Katsuki rests his forearm over his eyes. It's clear, by now, that his feelings will not be dulling anytime soon, which means he really has to figure out a way to deal with them. But when you're 14 years old, no one's really told you how to deal with being in love. Never mind how to deal with being in love with your best friend, who happens to be the same gender, and sort of 10 years younger than you thanks to some fucked up time warp. Yeah, Katsuki knew that saving Izuku would not be easy, but he didn't know it would be this difficult either. Monday morning, Katsuki wakes to a loud banging on his door with only a couple of hours of sleep to get him through. Apparently, he slept through his alarm. When he arrives at school, he has to face Izuku's concerned look as he slides into the classroom 5 minutes after the start of the school day. His grades and history of punctuality are good enough that the teacher only glares at him for a moment before gesturing to his seat. The morning classes pass, and Katsuki can't remember a word of what was taught. Izuku manages to catch him during lunch, when he was totally not going to escape to the roof and eat alone. Right, they're friends. He can't protect Izuku if he distances himself too much. They eat lunch together like they used to. How was Katsuki supposed to refuse when Izuku asked? So they sit across the table from each other in silence. About what you said yesterday, Izuku says, breaking the silence. What do you mean, if I get a quirk someday? Katsuki swallows, chopsticks pausing halfway to his mouth. It was a stupid offhand comment, but he should have known Izuku would notice it. Hypothetically. Katsuki puts his chopsticks down. It doesn't matter. No way for someone who's quirkless to get a quirk, of course. No one knows one for all exists. No one needs to. Katsuki bites his lip. There's a part of him that knows that All Might's successor has to be Izuku, but he doesn't know how to make that happen. Telling Izuku now doesn't seem to be the best idea, either. Especially since he can't guarantee anything. Have you picked a weapon? Katsuki tries to divert the conversation to another topic. It takes a second for Izuku to realize what he's asking. Yeah, I'm getting a Bakken. I'll be learning Iaido and Kendo, but I'll also try to work on other types of physical training. Without that I'd be. And so, Izuku talks, and Katsuki listens, trying not to look too starstruck. At the end of school, Katsuki slips away. Izuku can walk home by himself. He'll stop strategically avoiding him someday, but right now, he needs to get his breath back. He walks slowly down a route he usually doesn't take to get back. He freezes in his tracks. There's a rush of something nostalgia, no fear. He feels like he's walked down this alley before. Katsuki feels the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. There's something wrong, but if something happened before, he would remember it, right? Katsuki doesn't have time to think about what he remembers or not, when he hears the voice behind him, the villain's voice. It sounds familiar. And then he remembers the lack of air and the almost asphyxiation. Katsuki knows he was in danger, and 𝗧𝗂𝗧𝗂 what? His head spins, and Katsuki braces his hand against the wall of the alley. They both survive, he knows. But there's a nagging guilt and anxiety in the pit of his stomach. He feels cold sludge wrap around his wrists. It raises goosebumps on his skin, and he knows what will happen next. Knows that he'll struggle for his breath for what seems like hours as his consciousness slowly fades. Katsuki breaks out into a cold sweat, and he struggles to get free. The sludge is too liquid to be vulnerable to his explosions, and too solid to get away from. It crawls up his arms and around his neck. He'll suffocate. He'll lose himself. As long as 𝗧𝗂 is safe, it'll be fine. As long as 𝗧𝗂 is safe, it doesn't matter what happens to him. His vision starts to blur, and his lungs ache. His head feels fuzzy, and he knows there are mere seconds left before he loses consciousness. Then there's a giant gust of wind and a loud voice. He feels his body collapse into strong arms. The next thing he knows, his eyelids flutter open in all might. This feels wrong. It's not what happened last time. It's different. Too different. All Might holds up the soda bottles that now hold the sludge villain before sticking them in his pockets. Then he bids farewell. Wait! Katsuki yells as he dives for one of All Might's legs. He doesn't know what he's doing or why he's doing it, but he knows that All Might has to give 𝗧𝗂 his quirk. Or does he? Katsuki knows 𝗧𝗂 will fight if he knows there's something to fight for. But if he doesn't have one for all, then the villains wouldn't come after him. Katsuki closes his eyes, trying to figure out what he should do. He wants 𝗧𝗂 to be safe, but he also wants 𝗧𝗂 to be happy. And if all 𝗧𝗂 has ever wanted to be a hero, is it really his job to take that chance away? All Might shakes his leg. My boy, can you let go? I must deliver this villain to the police. Katsuki loosens his grip slightly. He could ask All Might for help. All Might is a hero, and he is therefore obligated to help. But Katsuki feels like if he tells anyone he's been reset, something very, very bad will happen. He swallows, throat tight. His lungs still ache from lack of air. If I have a friend who doesn't have a quirk, but wants to be a hero, what do I do? He asks. All Might stops trying to walk away, and instead leans down to remove Katsuki from his leg. That's a difficult one, All Might says. I'd recommend the police force or being a detective. There's plenty of important work to be done that doesn't need a quirk. Katsuki grits his teeth. That's hardly the answer he wants. It's not what Deku would want to hear. It's not what he deserves to hear. I mean, is it possible for someone quirkless to be a hero? Katsuki restrains himself from saying more. He knows 𝗧𝗂 got the quirk from All Might. He knows 𝗧𝗂 hadn't been born with a quirk. Ergo, it is possible to receive a quirk from someone else, at least if the quirk is one for all. It's happened before, hasn't it? It can't be impossible. He has to be a hero. My boy, I know it's a lot to handle. A heavy hand is placed on Katsuki's shoulder. But sometimes things don't work out the way we want them to. The pro-hero pauses, and Katsuki looks up at him. That's when a cloud of steam erupts, filling the air. It's gone in a moment, leaving an emaciated All Might in its wake. Katsuki doesn't even bat an eyelash. This he remembers the thin, almost skeletal man that guided them. This he remembers when he's forgotten so much else. Katsuki bites his lip bitterly. All Might, Katsuki says. Can you meet him? Just meeting you would mean a lot. All Might eyes him suspiciously, and Katsuki thinks maybe he should have faked surprise. But there's not time to say anything. One of the bottles fell to the ground when All Might transformed, and now it's rolling towards the end of the alley. Katsuki makes a move to dive for it, but it's too far away. It rolls onto the sidewalk of a busy street, and Katsuki has to watch as an innocent person kicks it, and the cap flies off. The sludge monster disappears into an empty sewer. Shit, All Might says. He couldn't agree more. Katsuki gets to his feet. The anxiety that took root in his stomach is worse than ever. If the villain gets to 𝗧𝗂, he doesn't want to think about that. 𝗧𝗂 will someday be strong, but isn't yet. 𝗧𝗂 will someday know how to defend himself, but hasn't learned yet. 𝗧𝗂 is alone, and it's Katsuki's fault. We have to go, he calls to All Might, who's still staring at the spot where the villain disappeared. Katsuki runs to the alley's exit without looking back. As long as 𝗧𝗂 is safe, it doesn't matter what else happens. He skids to a halt when he sees 𝗧𝗂's green hair and yellow backpack. 𝗧𝗂 is walking back from school like he would any other day. 𝗧𝗂 who hasn't met All Might, who has no hope of getting a quirk. It feels wrong, so wrong. He sticks to 𝗧𝗂's side like glue, and they head for home. A lack of conversation stretches between them. Katsuki is thankful that 𝗧𝗂 doesn't ask questions. Glancing down, He notices that the collar of his school uniform is off kilter. At least the sludge didn't leave any residue behind. He tugs on the end of his sleeves and straightens out his jacket. His ears buzz with silence. It's an awkward silence, but the absence of sound becomes wrong. The hair raises on the back of his neck. The feeling lasts for a second. 1 second, and Katsuki knows what's going to happen next. Feels it. Sees it. It's not what happened last time, but the circumstances have changed. Sludge bubbles out of a nearby manhole. Muddy, sinister, but quick. Katsuki's reactions are nowhere near as fast as they someday will be, but they are fast enough to push Izuku out of the way. He hears Izuku scream his name as the cold sludge crawls over his body and entangles him again. He knows what's coming. The cold. The lack of air. And that almost makes it worse. His eyes linger on Izuku's face, even as the villain carries him away. His heart pounds loud in his ear, louder as the oxygen drains from his blood, and his lungs strain for the air they are deprived of. No amount of struggling can loose the hold the sludge has. Explosions rip from his palms, and his vision fills with orange flames and the blacks and grays of ash. His eyes sting with the effort of staying open, and the world goes in and out of focus. Somewhere in front of him, he can see a face framed by green curls. His ears pick up the sound of Izuku yelling his name, but the syllables sound distant, like he's shouting from far, far away. Izuku moves just close enough that Katsuki can see the blurry outlines of his features. With sludge suffocating him, he has no way to tell Izuku not to worry. But it's too late. In a sea of explosions and swirling colors, Izuku's face seems like the only thing that's clear. His eyes flutter, and blackness invades his field of view from the periphery. But even as he loses consciousness, he knows he'll never forget the look of torture in his best friend's eyes. His last thought before his mind turns cold is that there must be pro-heroes around somewhere, and, at the very least, he pushed Izuku out of the way. The dark cloud of unconsciousness takes over, without him being aware of giving up control. Izuku's screams are something he never wanted to hear. Not with this much clarity. Not piercing his ears as much as it pierces his soul. Not like he's there again. The agony of injuries from the other life aches in every cell of his body. His stomach clenches, and nausea begins to climb his throat. He hears the throbbing echoes of battle cries in his skull and flinches from the thrumming pain in his sides. His mouth is dry, but the taste of ash and blood coats his tongue. A cough forces its way from his throat, and he remembers the bitterness of spitting up blood from broken ribs tearing into his chest. Scenes of the past swim across his vision. Soul-deep fatigue echoes through the years. How long has he been fighting for? Decades? Years? Days? Or has the fight even begun? Izuku's face flashes by in smiles that grow scarce. There are tears and shouting and too many disagreements about whether to save the civilians in front of them, or send their forces to pursue villains. They'll save more people in the long run. But no hero should be able to turn their back on a crying child, and their cries echo from every corner. There aren't enough parents left. Not enough pro-heroes either. Students run themselves ragged trying to fill the gaps that the pros have left. But the villains are merciless, cruel, but strongly principled in their own twisted ways, and people agreed with them. Not enough to forgive their violence, but enough to shut their doors and watch from their windows, instead of try to fight. Katsuki remembers running out. Of energy. Of patience. Of friends. There's something that sounds like Kaken. I always in blinding pain before his mind goes blank. Resurfacing to the present is a shock. It feels like he's been free-falling through memories, and he just hit the cement below. His mind takes a moment to orient. The sun on his face feels foreign, and he doesn't know how to open his eyes and pretend he didn't just remember a past life. Especially when all he can feel is brokenness, and all he can hear is a voice raw with pain. Katsuki blinks his eyes open. The bright blue sky above and the pro-heroes huddled around him belong to someone else. He feels disconnected. And there's Izuku. Izuku who, he realizes, is kneeling over him, face closer than it has any right to be. Light freckles dot the bridge of Izuku's nose and spread out over his cheeks. They pale in comparison to the darker ones, and Katsuki wonders why he never noticed them before. Hai blinks again. His thoughts feel like they're running in slow motion. The memories are still floating behind his eyes, but most of the pain ebbs out of his system, all ghost of injuries from the other life. He notices that the sludge villain is gone and taken care of. Physically, Katsuki is fine. A sore throat and a couple of bruises are nothing. But mentally, the weight of his memories has the same impact as being hit by a bus. Or several. The team of medics fuss over him for a while. before he's finally allowed to get up and walk home with an oddly quiet Izuku. No one tells him what happened. He sees the dirt smudged across Izuku's face and the disheveled state of his uniform. His eyes fall on the extensive bandages around Izuku's right arm, and, suddenly, he gets the feeling that he doesn't want to know. A year later finds Katsuki sitting in the auditorium for Yua's entrance exam, and Izuku nowhere in sight. Glancing around the packed seats, he sees people that he knows and doesn't. The seat next to him is filled by some unknown idiot. Izuku was supposed to sit there. He knows this now. Katsuki grits his teeth and aces the exam. He gets 77 villain points and 13 rescue points. It's apparently some sort of record. He tries to feel happy when his acceptance letter arrives in the mail. Izuku doesn't talk about high school, and Katsuki doesn't mention Yua. The first day of class comes, and he slouches into the 1A classroom and sticks his feet on the desk. Ida yelling at him for it is almost nostalgic. There are 20 kids in class 1A, and Katsuki hates staring at the chair that should be Izuku's. After school, he finds himself in front of the Midoriya's apartment door. In the past year, he has stayed friends with Izuku, but an invisible wall has been driven between them. Katsuki wonders if it's his fault. It probably is. Izuku has never spoken about the day when the sludge villain appeared, and so Katsuki silently watched the scars on his right arm heal, trying not to think too hard about what caused them. He knows what burns look like. He knows what his explosions leave behind in their wake. The door opens before Katsuki has a chance to knock. It's Izuku, standing in a very familiar gray and dark teal uniform. Katsuki takes about 3 seconds to register this information before, "Deku, you piece of shit. Why didn't you tell me you were going to Yua?" Izuku has his hands up in defense, a nervous smile on his face. "I didn't know how to tell you. I'm just in the general department." So, Katsuki has the sudden urge to slam his face into the wall, which he just barely resists. If Izuku is at Yua, what does that mean? Does he have a quirk, or is he only there for what? He tries to clear his head. It's no use wondering. He needs to figure out whether Izuku has the quirk or not, for Izuku's sake. For all their sakes. The fate of one for all is basically the fate of the world. "You are a shitty friend," he mutters. "We can walk to school together tomorrow," Izuku offers. Katsuki pokes Izuku in the cheek. "Shitty friend." He accentuates each syllable with a poke. They spend the rest of the evening together. Katsuki struggles more than usual to stay on task. He has too many questions floating through his mind. Maybe he needs to talk to All Might. But before he fully considers that possibility, Katsuki reminds himself that it's too dangerous to speak about his circumstances. He retires early, exhausted by the first day of high school, and finding out that Izuku is, in fact, attending Yua. He leaves with a quick promise of meeting Izuku at the bottom of the stairs so they can walk together in the morning. Katsuki lies in bed for hours. He is tired, that's not the problem, but he has too many questions that he needs to answer. It's clear that the story he's a part of now is entirely different from what was happening before, and he doesn't know how to protect Izuku from it. If his best friend does indeed have All Might's quirk, the villains will be showing up soon. Even if Izuku is wholly quirkless, the villains pose a threat to everyone. Somewhere around 3 a.m., Katsuki falls into an uneasy sleep. Izuku meets him 20 minutes before school starts. He looks way too happy to be going to school. Katsuki tries to steady his heartbeat after Izuku gives him a half smile and a "let's go." Walking to school is a quiet affair, and Katsuki almost forgets things aren't like they were the first time around. That is, until Izuku waves goodbye at the bottom of the staircase and heads in another direction. As he watches a head of green hair disappear into the masses, Katsuki realizes he's never been to the other classrooms. What does the general department do? Without hero classes, their afternoons must be filled with other things. He makes a note to ask Izuku about it later. In the afternoon, they have their first challenge. Their hero costumes present no excitement to Katsuki. The design of his hero costume has remained the same, save for a few minor changes. His mask extends over more of his face, ending just above his jaw. The bottom is painted white to suggest fangs. He's assigned to a team with Ida and chosen to protect the bomb. They're up against Uraraka and Asui. Katsuki doesn't lose this time. It's a lifetime away, but he remembers how it feels to fight for his life. A class exercise like this is nothing. At the end of the day, he meets Izuku at the school gates. When they meet, he sees that Izuku has a noticeable bruise peeking out from under his left sleeve. Whether it's on purpose or not, Izuku shifts his hand so the bruise disappears, and Katsuki can't think of a good way to ask about it. Instead, he asks what the general department classes are like. and listens as Izuku starts detailing the quirks of everyone in 1C. The trip to 𝗧𝗵𝗲 comes too quickly for his liking. He remembers what happens on this day, that it's the first time he'll see the League of Villains face to face. Assuming things haven't changed too much, the bus ride passes in a blur, and he stares through the glass without really seeing anything. A tiny part of his brain is thankful that Izuku will be safely at school during this time. But the rest of his attention goes into thinking of scenarios where Izuku still ends up injured. There's also the worry that things have changed too much, and he still won't be able to save Izuku in the end. Katsuki tries to stuff the worry down into the deepest, darkest corner of his mind, but it feels like trying to hold on to one of his explosions. His fingers drum against the glass of the bus window, and he misses the moment when Asui makes a jibe about his personality. But he tunes into the bus conversation in time to hear Kirishima lamenting his lack of a flashy quirk. Since Izuku isn't there to encourage him, Katsuki gives him a grudging, "It's not a bad defense though." He quickly goes back to staring out the window when Kirishima gives him a shocked kind of smile, and someone says, "Uo," so he can be nice. As he leaves the bus, he brushes past the 20th student of Class 1A. It bothers him that he doesn't remember her. He's almost sure that he's never seen her before, not even in Class B all those years ago. So where would another hero course level student come from? With a shake of his head, he silences the questions. He senses no malice from her presence, so he shrugs it off. He knows what malice feels like. He would know if she was a threat. That much he's certain of. And, anyway, he has more important things to worry about, like that shithead Shigaraki. Katsuki feels the pit of his stomach tighten when he notices that there are only 2 teachers. All Might was supposed to be there with them. This he knows, but he cannot fathom why All Might wouldn't be there. Unless the pro-hero has passed his quirk to someone, he should be at full strength. He should be here. But he's not. Katsuki bites back the bile that rises in his throat. Whatever 13 is saying sounds far away. Katsuki can't make himself listen. His ears are primed for the sound of something that shouldn't be there. Every ounce of his being is dedicated to reacting the moment the villains arrive. If he can avoid being sucked away, maybe he can take down, or at least inhibit, someone important. If they caught Shigaraki here, the battle would be essentially over. Katsuki's eyes dart around the room. Aizawa stares with an almost bored look on his face. No one else is tensed for battle. Maybe he shouldn't be either. Maybe it will be fine. Katsuki looks down and realizes that his hands are already open. Fingers spread to let the explosions burst freely from his palms. And then it happens. He can hear a faint noise, something akin to a bathtub draining, and he spins to face it. There's a clear warp in space, and he can see the dark cloud of Kirigiri. Katsuki spreads his feet wider, muscles tensing to attack. And then chaos. Katsuki manages to knock 13 out of the way of the first attack. But the cloud of black encircles them, tendrils of smoky nothingness reaching for everyone a student. Katsuki makes an attempt to dive for Kirigiri's physical body. The warp villain is one of the cornerstones of the group, because of his ability to transport people in an instant. His disappearance would have a huge impact on the villain's strategy. Besides, isn't it a classical military strategy to shut off enemy supply lines? If he can stop Kirigiri, the heroes will have an advantage. It's a desperate attempt, he knows, but taking Kirigiri out of the equation is too tempting a concept to ignore. He really should know better. He's fought these villains before, and his quirk, despite whatever effort he has put into it, is nowhere near its full potential. The black gets thicker as he moves forward, until his limbs feel like they're moving against the pressure of 100 feet of water. He manages to keep himself on track with a couple of powerful blasts. In the darkness, he can't see clearly, so he has to operate with the assumption that Kirigiri remains stationary when he moves people. Whether that's accurate or not, Katsuki doesn't know. As quickly as it came, the blackness disappears, and any sign of Kirigiri disappears with it. Katsuki curses. If he had been a moment faster, maybe he could have gotten there in time. Katsuki spares a glance toward the exit, where he sees a flash of Ida's back, and the door swinging shut. Good. They'll have backup. Without another moment's hesitation, Katsuki heads to back up Aizawa with 13 a few steps behind him. He ignores the teachers telling him that he should stay back. Everyone in 𝗧𝗵𝗲 is fighting, and he'll be damned if he sits it out just because someone told him to. The highest density of villains is in the open space where Aizawa fights. The way he moves and captures villains is something Katsuki wishes he could watch. But he doesn't have time. So he grits his teeth and goes for the ones closest to him. They're weak. Exceedingly weak. Despite the villain's initial advantage in numbers, the advantage in strength is with the heroes. Katsuki lets himself catch his breath for a second. This fight is too easy, and he knows it. He knows there are more villains who should be on their way. But where are they? And for that matter, where the hell is All Might? Katsuki wipes his forehead of sweat and sends a large blast right into the face of the next villain that jumps at him. A chill runs down his spine, and it's enough to make him pause for a second. Then he sees Shigaraki. If he was stupider, he would dive right for the bastard's head. As it is, Katsuki instinctively freezes and almost gets hit in the head by some idiot villain. And then something he wasn't expecting at all happens. With a big gust of wind, 3 figures appear in the middle of the room. 3 figures, and only one of them is a person he immediately recognizes: All Might. The 2 standing on either side are shorter. For some reason, Katsuki's heart is pounding in his throat. There's a familiarity to the newcomers that he can't quite place. One with blonde hair pushed back from his face, and the other with his face covered by a mask and a cape. A mask with 2 spikes angled back over his head, in an imitation of All Might's unique hairstyle. Besides the masks and cape in one case, both of them are in the US school uniform, which means they're both students. The one with the spiky mask turns around, and Katsuki sees the back of his head. He has green hair. There are very few people Katsuki can think of with green hair. The knot in his stomach disappears. Instead, he feels like his stomach is simply gone. Izuku. Despite everything, Izuku is standing in the center of 𝐒𝐴𝐳 with determination, and probably All Might's quirk to back him up, and Katsuki has no clue how it happened. Izuku. The yell rips from his throat before he has time to stop it. The student with the spiky mask flinches, and Katsuki has zero doubt about left in his mind. Why Izuku didn't tell him, he does not know. Of course there are probably reasons, but Katsuki feels betrayal settle in his mind. Ugly, dark, and he doesn't want it there. At the same time his heart pounds, because Izuku is there, and there's a sense that maybe everything will go right, and he curses himself for putting the weight of saving the day on Izuku's shoulders again. With another large blast, the Namu makes an entrance. All Might has his hands full after that. And as much as Katsuki wants to run after Izuku and demand an explanation, he has his hands full with the other villains that are still in the area. He notes that Aizawa is already bleeding from a cut on his face, and 13 definitely looks worse for the wear. But, all in all, they're better off than last time. Hopefully, the rest of Wanna make it through with minimal injuries again. The next time he has a second to glance at All Might, he notices that the other 2 are gone. When the less important villains are dealt with, Katsuki is out of breath and nursing several small injuries, not least of which is a nasty cut above his eye. Feeling useless, Katsuki braces himself against a conveniently placed fence. From his place off to the side, he watches All Might's fight. As he watches, he thinks he can see the distinct signs that All Might is weakening. Which means only one thing: Izuku has inherited one for all. Katsuki grips the rail of the fence tighter, conflicting emotions swirling through his mind. Izuku is more capable of protecting himself, which is a good thing. But he has made himself a target for the villains, which is a very, very bad thing. All Katsuki can do is watch as All Might struggles against the Namu. He knows he can't help in that fight, and he knows he can't just dive for Shigaraki. By the time All Might wins, Izuku and the blonde mystery boy are back, school uniforms worse for the wear, and the students in Wanna trailing behind them. Katsuki feels something like worry when he sees that mystery boy is holding Asui in his arms. Something happened that didn't last time. And while that could be a good thing, this time it got someone hurt. At least it wasn't Izuku. All Might wins, and Katsuki can see the toll winning took, and his worry turns toward Shigaraki. With a weakened All Might and only 2 pro heroes who are not combat focused to stand against them, they would hardly stand a chance. Luckily, it's at that moment that the doors of 𝐒𝐴𝐳 burst open and backup arrives. Ida follows a few steps behind them, and something like relief breaks through Katsuki. The villains leave the same way they came, only leaving the now useless Namu behind. All Might disappears in a cloud of steam, but the view is quickly blocked. Katsuki runs toward Izuku, protective instinct overruling common sense. Izuku, in turn, reacts in surprise. His mouth, which is visible since the mask mostly covers the upper half of his face, opens slightly. "Kaken," he asks, and Katsuki can hear uncertainty and hesitation. There are a lot of things Katsuki could say in response, but he's never been good with words. "You're a fucking dumbass, Deku," he says instead. Izuku inclines his head in what Katsuki assumes to be remorse. "I'm sorry, Kaken, He drops his head to rest on Katsuki's shoulder, and Katsuki is too surprised to move. "I'm sorry," Izuku finishes, his voice hardly more than a breath against Katsuki's skin. "You damn well better explain later," he mutters. and then pushes Izuku off his shoulder, both because anyone in Wano could see them, and because Katsuki has not, in any way, at all been cured of being in love with Izuku. Katsuki turns away before Izuku notices, his cheeks burning, and heads back to the rest of the Wano students. The bus ride back to school is quiet. A few other pro-heroes have joined them on the bus, to keep anything else from happening. Their teachers, along with All Might, Izuku, and Mystery Boy, have disappeared as well. Katsuki sits glumly with his cheek pressed against the glass, trying not to notice Asui's empty seat. Instead of returning to classes, the students of Class 1A are sent to the nurse's office to be checked over. Katsuki sits numbly when it's his turn. With no major injuries, Recovery Girl finishes with him in less than 5 minutes. Asui lies in one of the beds behind a curtain, but she's standing by the time all the examinations are done. 20th stays by the end of her bed until Recovery Girl announces that she's fine and kicks the extra students out. Katsuki waits at the gate of the school. He will talk to Izuku somehow or other, because there's no way he can protect him unless he knows what's going on. He can guess that All Might is involved, but there are too many unknowns. The foundations of whatever he thought was happening have been erased. Izuku is most definitely not quirkless, and the villains are on the move. Katsuki scuffs the bottom of his shoe on the pavement as he waits. And then he sees them, Izuku and Mystery Boy. As they walk toward him, he gets a good look at the other blonde's face for the first time. At a glance, he looks like a young All Might, but the face is wrong. It's nondescript and round, but almost remarkable in its plainness. He's also missing the 2 locks of hair that stick up in a V shape from his forehead. Katsuki narrows his eyes at the 2 approaching figures. "Shitty Izuku," he calls when they're within earshot. Izuku flinches in surprise, and Mystery Boy looks mildly scandalized. Katsuki catches Izuku's words as he leaves the taller boy behind. "Sorry, 𝗧𝗵𝗲-senpai, I have to talk to him." 𝗧𝗵𝗲-senpai, Katsuki echoes. The name sounds vaguely familiar, but he brushes that thought aside. He has more important things to worry about now. "Explain," Katsuki demands the moment Izuku turns to him. "Not here." Izuku glances around furtively. "Let's go home," he suggests. Katsuki trails a step behind until they reach the door of the Midoriya's apartment. He hesitates at the door. He hasn't actually been inside the apartment for a year, and while it's true that he's never purposefully hurt Izuku this time, he hasn't been the best friend either. Nonetheless, Inko ushers him in with a promise of snacks, and he follows Izuku to his room. "This should be fine," Izuku says. He takes a deep breath. "I'm not supposed to tell you anything. Mom doesn't even know, but..." He trails off. "I feel like you deserve an explanation." Izuku folds his hands together in his lap and stares at them. He fidgets slowly, locking and unlocking his fingers, presumably trying to order his thoughts. For the first time, Katsuki finds himself staring at the scar on Izuku's right arm. He doesn't want to look, but something pulls his eyes toward it like a magnet. The skin is pink and rough. It stands out against pale skin. Katsuki tries to fight the rising anxiety. "You're not quirkless," Katsuki prompts. And then, at the sight of Izuku's shocked face, it's obvious. Izuku fumbles for a moment, his hands twisting in his lap. That's the important part. His eyes are still directed downward, but they're unfocused. "The rest isn't important," he mutters. He runs his hand over the burned scar, realizing what he's doing halfway through and freezing. "You said you'd explain," Katsuki says, prodding Izuku with his foot. "Do it properly." Izuku looks up, green eyes wider than usual. At least he isn't trying to avoid eye contact anymore. The sludge villain, it starts there. He adds that he went after the villain, with nothing more than a plan formed in 3 seconds in his backpack. "You're an idiot." Katsuki resists the urge to say anything else. Like, why the fuck did you try to save me? And of course you tried. Just like last time. "Continue," he prompts. Izuku continues. There's apparently not much to say. Just that he was saved by All Might, and the other pro-heroes told him it was a stupid thing to do. Katsuki thinks of a few things he'd like to say to them. Izuku doesn't mention the injury to his arm, but Katsuki knows what burns look like. He knows what his explosions can do to people when he doesn't limit their impact, and the sludge villain wouldn't have abided by that limit. Katsuki pushes those thoughts aside and tunes in back to what Izuku's saying. "I talked to All Might after that. I'm not sure what I said, but a lot of things happened. And I started training with 𝗧𝗪𝗏-senpai after school. I wasn't strong enough by the entrance exam. So that's why I'm in the general department." He looks up at Katsuki. I should have told you earlier, but I wasn't sure how you'd take it." Katsuki flicks him in the forehead. "I'm your friend, I would have..." What would he have done? He shakes his head. "Also, that is one shit explanation. What do you mean, a lot of things happened? Izuku leans away. It's not important. I just talked to All Might a lot and… He mutters something inaudible. What? I cried. And showed him what I can do with a Bakken. Katsuki still has a million questions he wants to ask, but he decides to leave the topic alone for the day. They both have homework to do, after all, and video games to play. They lie next to each other on the floor, textbooks scattered about, and Katsuki can't help but be amazed by how natural it feels. It's a good thing Izuku is so focused on his homework. He doesn't catch Katsuki staring once. Even though he remembers more of what happened, the nightmares persist. He's not sure if that makes what he sees at night better or worse. All it means is he's a little better at distinguishing between the horrors that his subconscious creates and the things that actually happened. But both leave him drenched in cold sweat when he awakes. There has been a new nightmare ever since he realized Izuku has a quirk. He sits in a room that's almost pitch black, but he can make out the shape of Izuku's features. Hands are placed into his. Instinctively, he knows they belong to Izuku. Something drips over his fingers and down his wrists. It's warm. He flinches when he realizes that it's blood. Izuku's blood. Izuku's face that was unblemished before is splotchy with bruises that grow by the second. Katsuki tries to grab Izuku's hands tighter, but his fingers touch nothing but empty space. And the image of Izuku's injured face dissolves into the blackness. Katsuki looks around desperately, but he's the only one there, and he wants only one thing: bring Izuku back. There's another new dream, too, but it's less of a nightmare. It involves something about Izuku beating him over the head with a Bakken. As the days pass, Katsuki tries to find ways to interrogate Izuku on other points, like, who the hell is 𝗧𝗵𝗲, and what did you show All Might with a Bakken that convinced him? The answer to the first question is easy enough. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 is a promising 3rd-year student who looks annoyingly like young All Might with a dumber face, which is probably an unfair description. Izuku is less willing to answer the second. Eventually, he gives up. When I said Bakken, I meant Bakken and other things. It's probably easiest if we just, spar. Izuku catches the look on his face. Only if you want to. Okay, try and hit me. If you can, that is. We can't just start fighting at school. We'll get in trouble. Also, I'll go ask 𝗧𝗵𝗲 to come watch just in case things get out of hand. Or maybe All Might. But he's a teacher, so that might be a… Katsuki tunes out the rest of Izuku's ponderings about what the best way for them to do this without breaking school rules is or blowing up random parts of the city. He knows it's probably best to plan ahead. Hopefully his dream about Izuku hitting over the head with a Bakken doesn't come true, particularly if he has an audience. Katsuki glances at his palms. He doesn't doubt his own strength at all, but Izuku's is currently completely unknown. He never used anything but his fists before. It turns out that 𝗧𝗵𝗲 thinks it's a great idea, especially when he realizes that Katsuki is that childhood friend. Katsuki tries to ignore that, but it bothers him anyway. Katsuki's dream doesn't quite come true, but Izuku lands several good hits without even using his quirk. Izuku has clearly been working on his combat skills. He's always been observant and a decent strategist, but his quick thinking and actual physical strength have greatly improved. Katsuki guesses that he should thank All Might and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 for that. In the end, Katsuki flattens him, but they're more evenly matched than they once were. Katsuki moves off of him quickly once the fight has been decided. There are some things about sparring that are definitely not good for his sanity, his heart, or anything else. Once they recover their breath, Izuku leaves to put his Bakken back in one of the storage sheds for sports equipment. It's against UA policy to let students carry weapons of any sort. This leaves Katsuki with 𝗧𝗵𝗲. There's the question of how much this guy actually knows about Izuku's quirk situation. And there's the fact that Katsuki knows next to nothing about him. It's a little bit awkward. He's gotten a lot stronger, hasn't he? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 starts the conversation. Huh. Katsuki looks up from inspecting the bruise forming on his forearm. Yeah? He gets a nod in return. Midoriya works really hard. He admires you a lot, you know? I'm sure you'll both turn into great superheroes. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 claps him on the shoulder. I'm sure I'll see you soon. The next second, the other blonde is gone, seemingly having disappeared into thin air. Katsuki stares at the spot where he was sitting. Izuku returns a minute later to find Katsuki still staring at it. Where the hell'd he go? Does he teleport? Katsuki mutters. Izuku laughs a little. Trust me, that's not the worst thing he does. Katsuki narrows his eyes. He hasn't done anything, has he? He tries to keep the jealous edge out of his voice, but probably fails. No, he just pops through walls when I'm walking to class. I think he's traumatized at least half of my classmates, too. Izuku sighs. Anyway, that's what I can do with a Bakken, he adds, switching the topic. Want me to teach you? Katsuki looks at the gleam of humor in his friend's eyes. Oh, fuck off. What are you going to do if you don't have it in a fight? What you do? Izuku grins. Punch him. Katsuki knows that a childhood friend is all he is, and he tries not to let that hurt. Anyway, he tells himself, he's not sticking around to be friends or anything else. He's there to make things different from last time. But damn, it still hurts. Fuck emotions. The next day he learns that having friends in another class is starting to make him interesting, and no amount of angry cursing will keep them away. Especially Kirishima. The hard-headed idiot has, for whatever reason, decided that being Katsuki's friend is cool. Katsuki doesn't think he's done anything particularly cool or manly recently, but he remembers that Kirishima always had a stubborn streak and never gave up on trying to be his friend. Something like an eager golden retriever that's bright red and is a rock. So not a golden retriever at all. Anyway, after class ends and lunch begins, Katsuki feels a heavy arm drop around his shoulders. Katsuki twitches. He isn't averse to physical contact, but it's usually either his mom smacking him for being an ass, his dad trying to stop him from getting into a fight with his mom, or Izuku. Katsuki thinks about the pros and cons of shoving Kirishima into the wall, and settles on hunching his shoulders, but not pulling away entirely. The fuck do you want? Kirishima ignores the angry tone of voice. Who's the dude you keep hanging out with? He seems cool. Since when was Izuku cool? He's a nerd, Katsuki says. He hangs out with a third year most likely to be #1 hero in 3 years. I'd say that's pretty cool. Katsuki pretends he knew that. Okay, hair for brains, time for you to fuck off. Somehow, he ends up eating lunch with Kirishima anyway. Apparently he has friends now. What the hell? Kaminari is sitting with them, too, even though he looks like he's ready to run at the first sign of danger. Katsuki resigns himself to it, noticing out of the corner of his eye that the rest of 1A seems to have settled into groups by now. The only ones sitting alone are half and 20th. When he tunes back into the lunch table conversation, he notices that Zero has joined them and is describing an incident where he managed to tape himself onto the ceiling a little after his 5th birthday. When school lets out, Katsuki waits for Izuku. He has to wait a full 20 minutes for Izuku and Tagada to appear somewhat out of breath. On top of that, Izuku's hair looks like more of a mess than usual. When the pair catch sight of him, Tagada sends Izuku towards him with a clap on the back and words that Katsuki can't quite make out. Training, Izuku mutters, as he joins Katsuki. You don't have to wait for me. Why did you? Is there something you wanted to talk about? Katsuki shrugs like it's no big deal. There's no way he's telling Izuku he just wanted to see him. Nah, just don't have anything else to do. Izuku falls into step beside him as they head towards their apartment building. Did you see? The sports festival is coming up. The general department's allowed to participate, too. Cool. Kaken, if we end up fighting, don't go easy on me. Katsuki scoffs and reaches over to pinch his friend. Why the hell would I go easy on you? If we end up fighting, you better run. I'm not running. Remember, I know your weakness. My what? You're ticklish. Izuku narrowly evades Katsuki's attempt to seize him and takes off running. So are you, dumbass. They arrive at the entrance to their apartment building dragging their school bags behind them and panting for air, but in good spirits. Izuku uses the wall to support himself as he clutches a stitch in his side. Once they catch their breath, they walk towards their respective apartments. As Izuku turns to walk to his own door, Katsuki almost stops him. It feels like too soon that they have to part. Izuku catches his eye before walking through the door. I'll see you tomorrow, Kaken. After the door shuts, Katsuki makes his way to his own door, strangely aware of how empty the air feels when Izuku isn't by his side. Before the sports festival, Katsuki declares war on all the other classes when they gather in front of 1A's door. He's less overconfident than he used to be, but nonetheless wants to provoke them. He wants to fight. He wants to be #1 this time without dispute. The hallway echoes with gasps and cries of indignation. Many UA students are proud of their strength, and rightly so, but Katsuki calls them all extras. Because that's what they are. Looking around at the sea of faces around him, he doesn't see a single one outside of 1A who fought beside them. He looks at their outrage at nothing more than a petty insult, and his lip curls. None of them stand a chance. The day of the sports festival dawns, and Katsuki is awake 3 hours earlier than usual. Maybe it's nerves. It's probably nerves. His memories from last time are clearest when they concern the villains. But he has a sort of uneasy feeling about today. It's different from the uneasy feeling he had before 𝐒𝐻𝐽, but he's still apprehensive. The sky is clear, and a light breeze ruffles his hair when he sticks his head out of his bedroom window to check the temperature. He walks to school with 𝗧𝗑, as per usual, before they part ways. The nervousness Katsuki has is bundled inside his chest in tight coils, and his limbs are jittery. The only danger to 𝗧𝗑 today is his own stubbornness, and Katsuki isn't sure he can do much about that. He vaguely remembers the roar of the stadium and the shouts of classmates, but nothing of villains. Katsuki tells himself to focus. When he finds the rest of 1A, the air is buzzing with excitement. He hears snatches of conversation speculations about the events, quirks of students in other classes, and who will win. Katsuki tunes them out, hearing only the slight rustle as he pulls his gym uniform on. Once he's dressed and his boots are laced up, he leaves the changing room behind, making his way through vacant hallways. Most of the students are still changing. It's still early. But then he hears something. All Might has his eye on you, doesn't he? It's 𝗵𝗃's low voice. It echoes eerily off of the empty walls. Katsuki pauses in the hallway, just around the corner from them. He's eavesdropping again. There are two voices, and the other is unmistakably 𝗧𝗑's. He leans his back against the drywall. Even through the fabric of his gym uniform, he can feel the cold wall sapping away his body heat. Katsuki suppresses a shiver and tries to pretend he's not worried. Are you All Might's secret child? It takes a moment for Katsuki to process the question. What the fuck, Todoroki? But then he wonders why 𝗵𝗃 even thought to ask. It's true that 𝗧𝗑's quirk vaguely resembles All Might's, but they couldn't look more different. Katsuki bites his lip to keep himself from snorting aloud. Then again, it sounds like a reasonable theory, especially when the truth is what it is. Katsuki thinks about whether or not 𝗵𝗃 could have stumbled upon one of 𝗧𝗑's training sessions. If he'd been spotted with All Might, it would look suspicious, wouldn't it? 𝗧𝗑 isn't even in the hero course. He's not in any class All Might teaches. He also wonders why a connection to All Might would make 𝗵𝗃 seek 𝗧𝗑 out. And then he tunes back into the conversation. Oh right. Todoroki's tragic backstory. It really is fucked. And Katsuki briefly thinks about punching Endeavor in the face. It's not that he particularly likes 𝗵𝗃, but Katsuki is a hero at heart. And a story of a quirk marriage and pouring boiling water on a kid's face should set any hero's blood boiling. Just around the corner, 𝗧𝗑 declares his intent to win. I may not be in the hero course, but I have my own reasons for fighting. I won't lose to you, Todoroki. My power is not All Might's, and I will win. There's a pause. Todoroki responds, and then two sets of footsteps start moving, and Katsuki has to escape before anyone realizes he just overheard the Flame Hero's son swear he'd win everything with only ice. The next time he sees 𝗵𝗃 is in the stadium. Katsuki acts like he didn't hear the conversation, and tries to think of a way to tell 𝗧𝗑 not to break all the bones in his hand, just to make 𝗵𝗃 use his flames. He's not supposed to know that, though, and 𝗧𝗑 will probably try no matter what he says. Maybe 𝗧𝗑 is strong enough to KO Todoroki, and no bones will be broken in the process. As the festival starts, Katsuki gets called up to make an announcement on behalf of Class A. He tells them he'll be number one. His eyes catch 𝗧𝗑's for a moment, and he's given a small smile. Katsuki nearly forgets what he's doing, but then turns back to the rest of the crowd. It doesn't matter if they boo him, they'll see his power soon enough. He curls his hands into fists at his sides and walks off the podium. Midnight details the first round of competition, an obstacle course, and then they're off. There are too many bodies at the beginning. It seems like hundreds of UA first years are crammed into a hallway that's only wide enough to fit 10 people shoulder to shoulder. Katsuki climbs onto some unlucky person's head and blasts off. He lost sight of 𝗧𝗑 a while ago, and he attempts to stop himself for searching for a head of green, curly hair. 𝗵𝗃 speeds ahead on his wave of ice. Katsuki avoids with a small explosion and takes off after him. As he runs, he sees that everyone in class dodged along with a few others, one of those others being 𝗧𝗑. Katsuki should be looking ahead of him, but his gaze fixes on 𝗧𝗑 for a few seconds longer. 𝗧𝗑 looks stronger, more sure of himself, and though Katsuki can't be sure, it looks like he's using some extra power to run faster. In another second, he's beside Katsuki. Hey, Kagan, he calls brightly, and Katsuki has to try his hardest to focus on running and not tripping over his feet. Fuck off, this is a competition, he snaps. 𝗧𝗑 swerves away from Katsuki's half-hearted attempt to shove him, and they continue down the track. 𝗧𝗑 stays, even with him, until they make it to the first obstacle. And then Katsuki really does manage to focus on the race. It takes only a millisecond for Katsuki to recognize the robots from the entrance exam. He skids to a halt. It would be stupid just to try and run through them. Before he has time to act, another wave of ice rises high above their heads and arches over the line of robots. Half and Half takes expands his lead. Katsuki grinds his teeth. Asshole. He uses a few more explosions to vault himself over the tumbling pile of robots. Todoroki may be first for now, but his back is getting closer.